I was walking home late from a friend's house in the narrow alleys of Kabul. The air was cool, a relief from the blistering heat of the day, but the chill had an unusual edge to it that night. My name is Farid, and I'm a simple shopkeeper, living in the heart of the city. Kabul, with its bustling markets and crowded streets, can sometimes feel like a maze of shadows. But tonight, the shadows felt different, deeper, more sinister. Farid, be careful. My friend Ahmad had warned me earlier that evening. People have been talking about Saya. They say she's been seen in these parts. Come on, Ahmad. I laughed it off. Saya is just a story to scare children. Ahmad's face remained serious. Perhaps, but there's truth in some stories. As I walked, the memory of his words lingered. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual clamor of street vendors and children playing replaced by a heavy silence. My footsteps echoed, a lonely sound in the night. The moon was a thin crescent, offering little light. I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the unease. Suddenly, I heard a soft rustle behind me. I turned, but there was nothing, just the darkness and the empty street. I chuckled nervously, convincing myself it was a cat or a gust of wind. But then I heard it again, closer this time, like the whisper of silk against stone. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding weak and uncertain. No response. I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. I continued walking, my eyes darting to every shadow. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, a figure draped in black, standing at the edge of an alleyway. She had long, flowing hair and pale skin that seemed to glow in the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest. I tried to ignore her and walked faster, but with every step, the feeling of being watched intensified. I dared to glance back, and she was closer, her eyes, dark and hollow, locked onto mine. "Farid, come to me," a voice whispered, though her lips did not move. I broke into a run, my fear driving me forward. I didn't stop until I reached my home, slamming the door behind me, my breath ragged. I leaned against the door, trying to calm myself. "What's wrong?" my wife Layla asked, concern etched on her face. "I saw her, Layla," I whispered. "I saw Saya." The next morning, the events of the night felt like a bad dream. But the unease remained. I went to the market, hoping the normalcy of daily life would ease my mind. The market was bustling with activity, vendors shouting their wares, the air filled with the scent of spices and fresh bread. "Farid, you look like you've seen a ghost," said Hamid, a fellow shopkeeper. I forced a laugh. "Just a bad night's sleep." Hamid nodded, but his eyes showed understanding. "Be careful, my friend. Saya has been seen by many lately. My cousin swears he saw her last week." I shivered. "What did he do?" "Nothing. He ran home and she did not follow. But the fear stays with you." I nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. The day passed in a blur, and I dreaded the walk home. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, I took a deep breath and began the journey back. The streets seemed even more foreboding than the night before. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound amplified in the silence. I kept my eyes straight ahead, refusing to look at the alleys. But it didn't matter. I felt her presence before I saw her. "Farid." The whisper came again, chilling me to the bone. I glanced to my left and there she was, closer than ever, her eyes boring into mine. I started to run, my feet pounding against the cobblestones. She followed, gliding effortlessly, her form barely seeming to touch the ground. My heart raced, my lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. I could hear her behind me, the soft whisper of her movement. I took a sharp turn, hoping to lose her in the maze of streets. But she was always there, just behind me. I burst into Ahmed's house, slamming the door behind me. He looked up in shock. Farid, what's going on? She's after me, Ahmad. Saya is after me. Ahmed's face grew serious. We need to go to the mosque. The imam will know what to do. Together we hurried through the dark streets to the mosque. The imam, an elderly man with a calm demeanor, listened to my story with a thoughtful expression. Saya is a spirit of the night, he said. She preys on fear. You must confront her without fear. How can I do that? I asked, my voice trembling. You must find the strength within yourself, he replied. Pray and have faith. She cannot harm you if you do not let her. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed him. We spent the night in the mosque, and for the first time in days I felt a sense of peace. The next evening, I walked home with Ahmad by my side. We recited prayers, our voices steady. As we approached my house, the shadows seemed to gather, growing darker. And then she appeared, standing in the middle of the street. Farid, she whispered, her voice like ice. I felt a surge of fear, but I pushed it down. Leave me, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. You have no power over me. She glided closer, her eyes filled with anger. You cannot escape me, she hissed. I am not afraid of you, I replied, though my heart pounded in my chest. She stopped, her form wavering. I continued to recite the prayers, my voice growing louder. Slowly, she began to fade, her figure dissolving into the night, and then she was gone. The sun rose, casting a golden light over the city. I stood in the street, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Ahmad clapped me on the back. You did it, my friend. I nodded, a smile breaking across my face. Thank you, Ahmad. We walked back to my house, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in days. Layla greeted me with a hug, relief evident in her eyes. From that day on, the shadows of Kabul no longer seemed so frightening. I had faced my fear and survived. And the story of Saya became just that, a story. But I never forgot the cold touch of the night, the feeling of being hunted. And sometimes, when the wind whispers through the alleys, I still hear her voice, reminding me of the night I faced the shadow of Kabul. I had always loved the tranquility of our small village near Ankara. The bustling city was close enough for convenience, yet far enough to keep the noise and chaos at bay. My name is Alif, and I am a teacher at the local primary school. Life was peaceful, or so I thought, until the nightmares began. It started with whispers among the villagers, stories of Basti, the night hag, who preyed on those who slept alone. I dismissed it as superstition, a relic of old folklore meant to scare children into behaving. But as the nights grew longer and the shadows deeper, I couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day at school, I lay down in my bed, hoping for a restful sleep. But as soon as I closed my eyes, I felt a weight on my chest, as if someone was pressing down on me. I tried to move, to scream, but I was paralyzed. My room, once a sanctuary, had become a prison. Elif, a raspy voice whispered, chilling me to the bone. I couldn't see her, but I knew she was there. Basti. When I finally managed to wake, drenched in sweat, the weight lifted, and the room was empty. But the terror lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching, waiting. The next day, I confided in my neighbor, Ice. She was older and wise, often knowing more about the village's history and its secrets than anyone else. Elif, you look pale, she said, her eyes filled with concern. I've been having these nightmares, I admitted. And I think it's Basti. Ice's face darkened. Basti is no mere legend. She is real, and she preys on those who are vulnerable. You must be strong, Elif. Do not let her see your fear. But how do I fight something I can't even see? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Come to my house tonight, I said. We will talk more. Perhaps there is a way to protect yourself. That evening, I went to Ice's home, a small, cozy house filled with the scent of herbs and spices. She made us tea and we sat by the fire, the flickering flames casting shadows on the walls. Tell me everything, she urged. As I recounted my experiences, Ice listened intently, her face grave. Basti feeds on fear and isolation. You must not sleep alone. Stay with me tonight. I agreed, grateful for her company. That night, I slept in a small room next to Ice. Despite her reassurances, the fear remained. As I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I heard the familiar whisper, Elif. I bolted upright, but there was nothing. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the moonlight through the window. I tried to calm myself, repeating Ice's words in my mind. But as soon as I closed my eyes, the weight returned, pressing down on my chest, suffocating me. Leave me alone. I managed to scream, my voice barely a whisper. The pressure eased, and I gasped for air. I stumbled into Ice's room, shaking her awake. She's here, I whispered. Ice's eyes widened, and she grabbed my hand. We must stay together. She won't harm us if we're not alone. We sat up through the night, talking and keeping each other awake. As dawn approached, the oppressive feeling lifted, and I finally felt a sense of relief. Days turned into weeks, and the nightmares continued. Despite Ice's presence, Basti found ways to torment me. I was growing weaker, my health deteriorating from lack of sleep. I needed a solution, and fast. One afternoon, as I was leaving school, I ran into Mehmet, an old friend from university who now worked as a doctor in Ankara. Elif, you look exhausted, he said, concern etched on his face. I haven't been sleeping well, I admitted. It's complicated. Tell me, he urged. Maybe I can help. I told him about Basti, half expecting him to laugh. But Mehmet listened seriously. There's an old clinic in the city, known for dealing with sleep disorders. I can refer you there. Desperate, I agreed. The clinic was a small, unassuming building on the outskirts of Ankara. Dr. Yildiz, a specialist in sleep medicine, welcomed me with a kind smile. We'll monitor your sleep tonight, she said. Perhaps we can find a scientific explanation for your experiences. That night, I lay in the sterile room of the clinic, electrodes attached to my head. The hum of the machines was oddly comforting. As I closed my eyes, I prayed that this would be the end of my torment. Hours passed, and nothing happened. I began to relax, thinking maybe it was all in my head. But just as I started to drift off, the familiar weight pressed down on my chest. Elif, the voice whispered, closer than ever. I struggled to move, to call for help, but I was paralyzed. The monitors around me beeped wildly, and I could hear the nurses rushing in. But they couldn't see her. Only I could see the ghastly figure of Basti, her eyes burning into mine. Let me go. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the pressure lifted. The nurses looked at me with confusion, their faces pale. What happened? One of them asked. I saw her. I stammered. She's real. Dr. Yildiz reviewed the data, her expression troubled. Elif, your brain activity shows extreme stress during these episodes. It's unlike anything I've seen. Am I going crazy? I asked, my voice trembling. "No," she said firmly. "But we need to find a way to stop this. Your mind is fighting something very real to you." I returned to the village, exhausted but determined. Ice greeted me with a hug. "Did they find anything?" "Only that I'm not insane," I replied with a weak smile. That night, Ice and I sat together, discussing our next steps. "We need to show her that you are not afraid," Ice said. "Fear is her weapon." As the night deepened, we prepared ourselves. Ice held my hand, her grip reassuring. We recited prayers, our voices steady. When the whispers began, I felt a surge of courage. "Basti," I called out, "you have no power over me." The room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in. But I stood firm, repeating the words over and over. The pressure built, threatening to overwhelm me, but I didn't waver. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The room was still, and the oppressive weight lifted. The first light of dawn filtered through the window, casting a warm glow over the room. Ice hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Elif. I couldn't have done it without you," I replied, my voice choked with emotion. In the days that followed, the nightmares ceased. I began to regain my strength, my life slowly returning to normal. The villagers, once skeptical, now looked at me with a mix of awe and respect. "Elif, you're a hero," Mehmet said when he visited. "You faced something unimaginable and survived." I smiled, though the memories still haunted me. "I just want to live in peace." As the months passed, the story of Basti became a part of the village lore. Children whispered about her, but they also spoke of the night a woman named Elif stood up to the night hag and won. Life returned to its tranquil rhythm, but I never forgot the lessons I learned. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to face it. And sometimes, the most powerful weapon against darkness is the light within us. And so, as the sun set over the hills of Ankara, I stood by my window, looking out at the world with newfound strength. The shadows held no power over me anymore, for I had faced the night terror and emerged victorious. My name is Amir, and I am a teacher in a small village near Riyadh. My life was simple and uneventful, filled with the routine of teaching and spending time with my family. But everything changed the day I decided to visit my uncle's farm in the desert. The journey was long and arduous, the sun blazing down on the endless expanse of sand. I had made this trip many times before, but this time something felt different. The air was heavy with a sense of foreboding, and the horizon seemed to shimmer with an unnatural light. As I drove, I noticed a figure in the distance, standing alone in the desert. I slowed down, curious. As I got closer, I saw that it was a man, dressed in traditional robes. His eyes were dark and piercing, and he raised his hand in a gesture of greeting. "Salam," I called out, pulling the car to a stop. "Salam," he replied, his voice low and melodic. "I am lost. Can you help me?" "Of course," I said, getting out of the car. "Where are you headed?" "I am looking for the village of Al-Khazna," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. A chill ran down my spine. Al-Khazna was a village long abandoned, rumored to be haunted by jinn. "That place is deserted," I said. "Why do you want to go there?" The man smiled, a strange, knowing smile. "I have my reasons." I felt an inexplicable urge to help him. "Get in," I said, against my better judgment. "I can take you part of the way." As he climbed into the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made a terrible mistake. We drove in silence for a while, the stranger staring out at the desert. Finally, he spoke. "Do you believe in jinn, Amir?" I glanced at him, startled. "How do you know my name?" He smiled again, that unsettling smile. I know many things. My heart pounded in my chest. Jinn are just stories, I said, trying to sound confident. Stories have power, he replied. And jinn are very real. They inhabit places like Al-Khazna, feeding on the fears of men. I shivered despite the heat. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. There are things in this world that you cannot comprehend. And once you see them, they become a part of you. I didn't know what to say. The desert stretched out endlessly before us, the road winding through the dunes like a serpent. Stop the car, he said suddenly. I pulled over, my hands trembling. He got out, turning to face me. Remember this, Amir. Once you invite the jinn into your life, they will never leave. Before I could respond, he vanished into the desert, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. I arrived at my uncle's farm just as the sun was setting. He greeted me warmly, but his smile faded when he saw my expression. Amir, what happened? I told him about the stranger and his warning. My uncle, a man of few words, listened quietly. When I finished, he sighed. There are things in this desert that we do not understand. The jinn are one of them. I scoffed. You don't really believe that, do you? He looked at me, his eyes serious. I've seen things, Amir. Things that cannot be explained. That night, I lay awake in bed, my mind racing. The stranger's words echoed in my head, and every shadow seemed to move with a life of its own. Finally, exhaustion claimed me, and I fell into a fitful sleep. I dreamed of Al-Khazna, the abandoned village. In my dream, I walked through its empty streets, the buildings crumbling and overgrown with weeds. I felt a presence behind me and turned to see the stranger, his eyes glowing in the darkness. Amir, he whispered, his voice echoing in my mind. You cannot escape. I woke with a start, my heart pounding. The room was dark, and I felt an oppressive weight pressing down on me. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed. A cold, clammy hand touched my forehead, and I screamed. The weight lifted, and I bolted upright, gasping for air. My uncle rushed into the room, his face pale. Amir, are you all right? I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. The jinn, they're here. The next day, I was determined to leave the farm and return to the village. But as I packed my things, my uncle stopped me. You cannot run from this, Amir. The jinn will follow you. I stared at him, my mind racing. What can I do? He handed me a small amulet, inscribed with ancient symbols. This will protect you. Keep it with you at all times. I took the amulet, feeling its weight in my hand. Thank you, uncle. As I drove back through the desert, the sense of foreboding returned. I clutched the amulet tightly, praying for protection. The sun blazed overhead, casting long shadows across the dunes. Suddenly, the car sputtered and died. I tried to restart it, but the engine wouldn't turn over. Cursing, I got out and opened the hood, but I couldn't see anything wrong. As I stood there, I heard a whisper. Amir. I spun around, my heart pounding. The stranger stood behind me, his eyes burning with an otherworldly light. You cannot escape, he said, his voice echoing in my mind. I backed away, clutching the amulet. Leave me alone, he laughed, a cold, chilling sound. You invited us in, Amir. We are part of you now. I ran, stumbling through the sand, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The stranger's laughter followed me, growing louder and more menacing. I stumbled into a small cave, collapsing on the cool, shaded ground. The amulet glowed faintly in the darkness, and I clutched it like a lifeline. Amir, The whisper came again, closer this time. You cannot hide. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding. The air grew cold, and I saw a shadow moving towards me. The stranger emerged from the darkness, his eyes glowing. Why are you doing this? I cried, my voice trembling. You invited us, he replied, his voice calm and cold. And now we will never leave. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. I never wanted this. It does not matter, he said. You belong to us now. He reached out and I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder. I screamed, the sound echoing through the cave. The amulet flared brightly, and the stranger recoiled, his form shimmering. You cannot escape, he hissed, before vanishing into the darkness. I sat there, shaking, the amulet clutched in my hand. I knew then that my life would never be the same. Days turned into weeks, and the nightmares continued. Every night, I would wake to the sound of whispers, the weight of a presence pressing down on me. The amulet kept the jinn at bay, but it could not banish them completely. I returned to the village, hoping for some semblance of normalcy. But the sense of dread followed me, and every shadow seemed to hide a threat. One evening, as I sat in my small house, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find a young boy, his eyes wide with fear. Amir, my mother is sick, he said. She needs your help. I followed him to his home, a small, modest house at the edge of the village. His mother lay in bed, her face pale and gaunt. She looked at me with haunted eyes. They're here, she whispered, her voice trembling. The jinn. I felt a chill run down my spine. What happened? She went to Al-Khazna, the boy said, his voice filled with fear. She said she saw something terrible. I placed the amulet in her hand, hoping it would offer some protection. But as I did, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see the stranger, his eyes burning with malevolent light. You cannot escape, he whispered, his voice echoing in my mind. The room grew cold, and I felt the weight of the jinn pressing down on me. The woman screamed, her eyes wide with terror. The boy clung to my arm, his face pale. Leave us alone, I shouted, holding up the amulet. The stranger laughed, a cold, chilling sound. You cannot banish us, Amir. We are part of you. I felt a surge of anger and fear. I will not let you take us, I shouted, my voice trembling. The amulet flared brightly, and the stranger recoiled, his form shimmering. This is not over, he hissed, before vanishing into the darkness. The room grew warmer, and the oppressive weight lifted. The woman calmed, her breathing steadying. The boy looked at me with wide eyes. Thank you, he whispered. I nodded, my heart still pounding. Keep the amulet, I said. It will protect you. As I walked back to my house, I felt a sense of relief. But I knew the battle was not over. The jinn were still out there, watching, waiting. I would have to be vigilant, but I was determined to protect those I loved. The desert held many secrets, and I had glimpsed its dark heart. But I had also found strength within myself, a strength that would see me through the darkest of nights. And as the sun set over the dunes, I knew that I would never again take the safety of daylight for granted. My name is Farhad, and I am an architect from Kabul. After years of working in the bustling city, I decided to take a break and visit my ancestral home in the mountains of Badakhshan. The house, built by my grandfather, had always been a place of solace for me, away from the chaos of urban life. The journey to the mountains was long and treacherous, the narrow roads winding through steep cliffs and deep valleys. As I approached the village, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The air was crisp and clean, the landscape dotted with almond trees in full bloom. The house stood at the edge of the village, its stone walls and wooden beams a testament to my grandfather's craftsmanship. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, inhaling the familiar scent of wood and earth. Memories of my childhood flooded back, and I felt a deep connection to this place. But as night fell, the peace was shattered by an eerie silence. The villagers had warned me about Gul-e-Badam, the almond flower ghost, but I dismissed their stories as mere superstition. Little did I know that I was about to face a horror beyond my wildest imagination. The first night was uneventful, and I slept soundly in my old room. But the next evening, as I sat by the fireplace, I heard a faint whispering outside. I went to the window and saw the almond trees swaying in the wind, their blossoms shimmering in the moonlight. "Farhad," a soft voice called, sending a shiver down my spine. I looked around, but there was no one in sight. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the whispering grew louder. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the wind playing tricks on my mind. But as I lay in bed, the whispers persisted, filling the room with an unsettling presence. I tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next morning, I decided to visit the village elder Haji Karim. He was a wise man, respected by everyone in the village. I hoped he could provide some answers. "Haji Karim, I need your help," I said, my voice trembling. "I heard whispers last night, and they seemed to be calling my name." The old man looked at me with a grave expression. "You have heard Gul-e-Badam," he said. "She is a vengeful spirit, cursed to wander these mountains. Many have heard her whispers, and those who ignore her warnings often meet a terrible fate." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What should I do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Stay away from the almond trees," he warned, "and never go out at night. Gul-e-Badam preys on those who wander alone in the dark." I heeded Haji Karim's warning and stayed indoors after sunset. But the whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent. I felt a cold presence in the house, as if Gul-e-Badam had followed me inside. One night, as I sat by the fireplace, the whispers turned into sobs. I felt a pang of sorrow, mixed with fear. "Farhad," the voice called again. "Help me." I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to know who or what was haunting me. I grabbed a lantern and stepped outside, the cold night air biting into my skin. The almond trees stood tall and silent, their blossoms glowing in the moonlight. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice echoing through the valley. "What do you want from me?" For a moment there was silence. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows, her long hair flowing in the wind, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I am Gul-e-Badam," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I was once a maiden of this village, betrayed and left to die under these trees. My spirit cannot rest until my story is heard." My heart ached for her. "Tell me your story," I said, my voice trembling. She floated closer, her form ethereal and fragile. "I was in love with a young man from the village, but he betrayed me for another. In my despair, I took my own life under these trees. My soul is bound to this place, cursed to relive my pain for eternity." Tears filled my eyes. "How can I help you find peace?" I asked. She looked at me with a mixture of hope and despair. "You must find the one who betrayed me and bring him to justice. Only then can my spirit be free." Determined to help Gul-e-Badam, I began my search for the man who had betrayed her. I asked the villagers, but most were reluctant to speak about the past. However, Haji Karim provided some clues. "There was a man named Rahim," he said. "He left the village many years ago, shortly after the maiden's death. No one knows where he went. I decided to visit the nearby towns, hoping to find someone who knew Rahim. Days turned into weeks, and my search seemed futile. But just as I was about to give up, I met an old woman in a small town who remembered him. "Rahim?" she said, her eyes narrowing. "He was a scoundrel, always getting into trouble. Last I heard, he was living in a village to the north, near the border." With renewed hope, I traveled to the village. It was a small, run-down place, and the people were wary of strangers. I asked around and finally found Rahim, now an old man, living in a dilapidated house at the edge of the village. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice raspy and weak. "My name is Farhad," I said. "I am here because of Gul-e-Badam." His eyes widened with fear. "No," he whispered. "She is dead. She cannot haunt me anymore. Her spirit cannot rest," I said, my voice firm. "You must face the consequences of your actions." He shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I loved her," he said, "but I was weak. I betrayed her trust and left her to die. I have lived with this guilt for all these years. You must return to the village and confess your sins," I said. "Only then can her spirit find peace." Reluctantly, Rahim agreed to return with me to the village. The journey was long and arduous, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew that he would have to face the ghosts of his past. When we arrived, the villagers were shocked to see him. Whispers spread quickly, and soon everyone knew why he had returned. Haji Karim gathered the villagers and led us to the almond grove where Gul-e-Badam had died. Rahim stood before the trees, his hands trembling. "I am sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I betrayed you, Gul-e-Badam. I was a coward, and I have lived with this guilt every day." The wind picked up, and the blossoms seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. Gul-e-Badam's figure appeared among the trees, her eyes filled with sadness. "Your apology is heard," she said, her voice soft and ethereal. "But it is not enough. You must face the consequences of your actions." Rahim fell to his knees, sobbing. "I am ready," he said. "Do with me what you will." The villagers watched in silence as Gul-e-Badam's form faded into the night. The wind calmed, and the air grew still. I felt a sense of closure, knowing that her spirit had finally found peace. After Rahim's confession, the village began to heal. The whispers stopped, and the almond trees blossomed with new life. The villagers no longer spoke of Gul-e-Badam with fear, but with reverence. Rahim remained in the village, helping to rebuild what he had once destroyed. He worked tirelessly, trying to atone for his sins. The villagers, though wary at first, eventually accepted him back into the fold. I stayed for a while longer, helping where I could. My experience with Gul-e-Badam had changed me, and I felt a deep connection to the village and its people. The house in the mountains became a place of healing, a sanctuary for those seeking peace. One evening, as I sat by the fireplace, I felt a presence beside me. I looked up and saw Gul-e-Badam, her form radiant and peaceful. "Thank you, Farhad," she said, her voice like a gentle breeze. "You have given me the peace I sought for so long." Tears filled my eyes. "I only did what was right," I said. She smiled, and I felt a warmth spread through me. "You have a kind heart," she said. "May you find peace and happiness in your life." With that, she vanished, leaving me with a sense of fulfillment and closure. The curse of Gul-e-Badam had been lifted, and the village could finally move forward. As the years passed, the village thrived. The almond trees bloomed brighter than ever, and the whispers of Gul-e-Badam became a distant memory. I continued to visit the house in the mountains, finding solace in its quiet beauty. One day, as I walked through the village, I saw children playing under the almond trees, their laughter filling the air. The sight brought a smile to my face, a stark contrast to the fear and sorrow that had once haunted this place. Rahim had become a respected elder, his past sins forgiven, though never forgotten. He dedicated his life to the village, ensuring that the story of Gul-e-Badam was told to every new generation, not as a tale of horror, but as a lesson in love, betrayal, and redemption. I often joined the villagers in their gatherings, sharing stories and memories. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Haji Karim approached me. "You have done a great service to our village, Farhad," he said, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Gul-e-Badam's spirit has finally found peace, and we have you to thank for that." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "It was a journey I needed to take," I replied. "I found more than I was looking for. I found a connection to my roots, to my family, and to this land." Haji Karim smiled, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You will always be welcome here, Farhad. This is your home." Years later, I returned to Kabul, carrying with me the lessons I had learned in the mountains of Badakhshan. The city was still bustling, but I had found a new sense of peace and purpose. My work as an architect took on new meaning, as I incorporated the beauty and serenity of the mountains into my designs. But I never forgot the village, the almond trees, or the spirit of Gul-e-Badam. I visited often, especially during the almond blossom season, when the trees were in full bloom. The village had become a symbol of resilience and hope, a place where the past was honored and the future was embraced. As I walked through the village one last time, I saw a young couple standing under the almond trees, their hands entwined. They looked at me and smiled, and I felt a warm sense of contentment. The story of Gul-e-Badam had come full circle, from sorrow to redemption, from fear to peace. And as the sun set over the mountains, casting a golden glow over the village, I knew that her spirit would always be a part of this land, a reminder of the power of love and the strength of the human heart. Thank you for watching our stories about this urban legends. Did you enjoy it? How do you feel about them? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more stories based on real-life events, click on the video appearing on your screen now, or you can check the other horror stories playlist right there. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling tales. See you in the next video.